Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in retrograde. So we discussed recently Saturn in Aries, we discussed Neptune in Aries, and we discussed the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries. But it's now going retrograde into Pisces, where those two were previously co-present from March of 2023 until March of 2025. But one thing that we see when we have these big outer planets crossing back over the sign barrier for one more go at a given sign, it can hit a little bit different than it does the first time around when we're just in it and dealing with it. So we're going to look at this conjunction in this broader context of the fact that it's going backward. Now, I have some dates here. I won't call them all out here, and there's no need to memorize all of this. I haven't committed all of these dates to memory, but if you want to screenshot it, you can go for that. The TLDR on this is that we had Neptune start to go retrograde on the 4th of July, and then we're going to have Saturn go retrograde here in about a week or so on the 13th of July. And that will continue their retrograde until the winter, this winter, but on the 2025 side. And they will cross the sign barrier back into Pisces in the September-October timeframe. And of course, they'll both then carry in the very beginning of 2026 back forward permanently into Aries. And the exact conjunction, we're only going to get one of those this time. That's going to take place on the 20th of February of 2026, but it's also really important to keep in mind they're effectively already in an exact conjunction. I think that this month into August, they get within about a quarter of a degree of each other, so it basically counts. And this represents an absolutely massive planetary cycle of Saturn and Neptune. We get these conjunctions every 36 years or so. So the last ones were in 1989, 1952, and I want to say that the one before that was around 1918 or a bit before then. And so whenever we get conjunctions like this, which we're going to go into in a moment, we need to look at what are some of their similarities, how are they reinforcing each other, and then how do they also contradict each other? So where are some of the contradictions that we're going to be running into? And contradiction in and of itself is a major component to these conjunctions. But before we dive into all of that, I wanted to show you guys this visually. So I have here several different charts. Again, if this is a little overwhelming of a graphic to look at, there's no problem with that. We'll go into what all of this means. But I wanted to put this here as well, just in case anyone wants to screenshot it and get a visual on what this is going to look like. So on the 7th of July, which is when I'm going to aim to be publishing this video, we have Neptune retrograde and we have Saturn still direct. And you can see here that they are only about 15 minutes, which is a quarter of a degree away from each other. So July is going to be the closest pass that we get between these two. The reason for that is that Saturn always moves faster than Neptune does, even in retrograde. So it's about to put on the brakes, throw it in reverse, and then reverse faster than Neptune is. So by the 14th of July, you can see we have them both retrograde. And then by the 22nd of October, we have them both back in Pisces, and they're both retrograde. But you can see how Saturn distances itself a little bit from Neptune. But this is still very, very close, highly active by any astrologer's assessment. Then by the 11th of December, we have them both direct, still in Pisces. And then on the 20th of February, we have the exact conjunction of the two of them at 0 degrees and 45 minutes. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into what this actually means for us. And I'll try to look at this from a personal, collective, and then I'm sure, as I always do, I'm going to wind up veering into a geopolitical kind of a perspective with this as well. But let's get a general overview of the energies that we're dealing with here with Saturn and Neptune. And I have here some of the dichotomies between these two. So with Saturn, we're ultimately dealing with structure. We're dealing with the boundaries of that structure. What is implied is limited by that structure, the rules of it. So what is it that you're not allowed to break out of? What is it, the limit beyond which you're not able to go. If we think about this, this winds up playing very strongly into the realm of possibility. So what is possible and what's not possible? Saturn's going to try to draw some pretty strong lines on what's not possible because it doesn't have a precedent for it. It does tend to look pretty strongly backward. Now, it doesn't inherently have to. It does also, in traditional astrology, rule Aquarius, which takes that structure and does try to imagine how it might be shaped in a more efficient or effective way going forward. But this is the kind of standard way that we see Saturn. We also then see authority and institution. So what are we dealing with there? These are the things that are established. So again, we're looking to the past when we're looking at what is established right now, what is the status quo right now. That's always established in the past, right? And so I'll mention it again. We're going to reference 89 and 52 pretty regularly in this video, but just think about how this was shaped in 1989 and the unipolar moment that came out of that. That is the competition that was perceived by the United States and by the West throughout the period of the Cold War, especially after approximately 52, 53, with the passing of Stalin and then the institution of a new phase of Soviet history, and how that changed the relationship of the US with the rest of the world. That then mainly comprising the period of decolonization and the struggle that wound up taking place, for instance, with Vietnam, where we saw there are two different geopolitical sides in the world, and there's an attempt to clamp down on that and to institute something of a unipolar authority. And yet, it wasn't until 1989 that that was actually reached, at which point that authority, those institutions wound up establishing their authority based on a sort of uncontested hegemony, whole cloth. And we can have whatever feelings we have about that, but on a global scale, we can see how these periods of time wound up playing out in this way. Now, the other side of that is the story that's told. It is the cultural ideation around, again, what's possible. And that's where Neptune comes in to challenge Saturn. It challenges the past. It challenges the limits and the structures. And the way that it does that is by broadening the scope of what's possible. It winds up pulling in all different perspectives, ideals, values, cultures, aspirations, and according to Neptune, all of that is within the realm of possibility. It winds up then running into the structures, the limits, the barriers of Saturn, and it can wear some of those away, especially those which don't ultimately make sense or don't ultimately fit any sense of reality in that given moment. So with Neptune, the way that I see it, it's not so much the fabric of society, but it's more so the fabric of the universe, the fabric of what is in the ether, the collective unconscious, a major collectivized version of the subconscious, basically. Often when we're looking at our lives and the world, our biggest aspirations are based upon the framework or the structure of what it is that we believe is possible. There's this sense of wasting our time if we imagine something to simply not be possible, or even simply not to be desired based on one's sentiments and one's imagination around what's available to us. So what is it that we can envision for ourselves, for the world? That's then going to define what action we wind up taking, what it is that we wind up going after. And if we look at the cultural aspect then of Neptune, this also winds up making quite a bit of sense as well, where cultural attitudes can also serve as the framework within which aspirations are limited by possibility. It's very difficult for an individual human being to have and pursue certain aspirations which are deemed anathema to the culture in which that individual lives. So one perfect example perhaps for today, because I think that this is some of what is coming apart, is the idea in, we'll just say the United States, While so many people would love to be independent, would love to establish a business for themselves, would love to follow their calling, so many of us feel like it's just not within the realm of possibility, that there's too much of an investment that's needed. There's even now a cultural ideal around like mega corporations and things like this that employ so many of us, and perhaps even then wind up reining in some of the imaginative and inventive potential in individuals, because they simply don't have the time to work a job to be able to pay their rent, pay their health care, et cetera, and pursue that goal with enough time. Now, again, whether that's a good thing or not, that can be argued, but that is the case right now. Even cultural ideals around, for instance, whether someone who is not going out of their way to try to work for a company like that should be allowed to eat, or should be allowed to go to the doctor, or should have a roof over their head. Things like this. These are cultural ideals that tend to be baked in each Saturn and Neptune conjunction. And of course, we can see one instance of this today with the bill that was just passed around more stringent work requirements for people who are on Medicaid. That is a cultural ideal. That's not just a universal given. That's not the way that most countries function. And yet, given the limits of the imagination centered in US culture, it can feel like a real uphill battle to make any other argument around that. And again, we can feel one way or the other about that, but that is the cultural reality of the moment in this place. And so all of that which Saturn defines as impossible or outside of the realm of possibility, which is the boundary that it draws in the sky, that tends to be embodied in part by Neptune. We can also see some of that in Uranus, which we'll discuss in other videos. But that aspiration to break out of the mold is really embodied in Neptune. And these moments when we get Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, these are often the moments where that mold does wind up breaking down, particularly in ways where it's no longer serving, where it no longer makes sense. And this, of course, will not just be a matter in the United States in these years, but will absolutely be the case in many other countries. So let's personalize this a bit. So what does this mean for us on an individual level? These moments of Saturn conjunct to Neptune, they tend to come up for us as a point at which we are shaken a bit by our sense of imagination, our sense of sentiment around what the limits of reality are as imposed upon us versus what we can envision. And of course, what we can envision is usually a matter of Neptune, which is to say that's going to be beyond Saturn. It can feel in these moments then that the Saturnine structure in which we have been living our lives is a disappointment and is increasingly unsustainable. Perhaps especially because of the fact that so much of this conjunction is within the realm of Aries. This is part of why I was saying I think it's great to consider examples of this within the world of work, within, for instance, the United States, where it is a little bit more controlled even than in Europe. Because I do hate to say, but the way that work functions as an institution, employment, getting by in this country is extremely limiting, in fact. And this conjunction in Aries is really going to wind up breaking that down. I think that we're going to have so many more entrepreneurs out of this and people going independent, because that's what the underlying urge will be, is to create a structure for oneself, for one's life, for one's reality that is more in alignment with the vision that they have for their life. Aries is a fundamentally independent sign, which is generally deeply irreverent to that which others might try to impose upon it. So while the Saturn and Aries aspect of this, I think, is going to help with making us much more determined and insistent upon our own independent prerogative to define the structure of our lives for ourselves, ultimately, I think that that Neptune in Aries is going to help here immensely to undermine the part that Saturn can play in that imposition. It usually does represent some form of authority, and so that which has authority over us is going to come under a lot of pressure in the coming years. Now, this retrograde is then going to wind up pulling these two back into Pisces. And the important part of that, let me skip ahead here real quick. The important aspect along the lines of Aries into Pisces and Pisces into Aries is that we wind up crossing the 0 degrees Aries point. And this is one of the most, if not the most, sensitive degrees in the zodiac. It represents the beginning and the end of the zodiac. And just as Aries is strongly individual, strongly independent, very much about willpower and taking personal action, that's part of its role as the beginning sign, the first sign of the zodiac as we reckon it. Pisces is the final sign of the zodiac and represents the universalization of any given matter. We can see here how Pisces actually, I don't take modern rulerships, but there's a lot of overlap between those two archetypes. Pisces is really the cosmological soup and the cultural soup that we wind up reaching together all at the end of the zodiac. And just as much as Aries can even take that individualistic or independent energy to extremes, Pisces can undermine that to extremes as well. So I'll give you a quick, very oversimplified example, but for instance, with Venus in Aries, often one of the first delineations that you'll get around that is self-love, or being able to define strongly for oneself what one likes, what one doesn't like, and then not feel the need to take a whole lot else into consideration. Whereas Venus in Pisces tends to strongly blur the lines between love and compassion. And a major symbol of that is universal love, so loving all of humanity almost equally. And not only blurring the lines between then compassion, a universalized compassion and love, but even a universalized pity and love. So the polarity here that we're dealing with is ultimately one, which is the self, versus everything, the everything soup that we exist in this world. And so with Pisces, we can definitely see a sense of self-denial, or the acceptance of imposition, a lot of excuse making around that. Now, if you try to clamp down on it a little bit too much, it might flee, but it's not likely to react assertively. It's not likely to react aggressively. It's more likely to react passively. And funny enough, with the whole quiet quitting thing that we've seen recently, we can probably already see some of that Saturn-Neptune conjunction playing out for us. It's just that it hasn't quite been active yet. Now, we're getting pushed back into that Pisces realm. And what we're looking back at here is about 15 years of Neptune having been in Pisces. It moved in there in 2011. And then we're dealing with a few years of Saturn in Pisces. It first moved in there in March of 2023. So we're looking at what is it that we've learned? Perhaps about being too passive about things that aren't ultimately what we desire being imposed upon us. What is it that we've learned about our sense of compassion and deeply held values? What is it that we have learned about our culture that we may or may not feel we are in alignment with? Likely a lot of this is going to be around the role that we play in the broader culture that we live in, the broader society. And we may have found ourselves on a personal level feeling like we've been taking a back seat to what it is that we feel that we ought to do for the collective, or that we ought to maintain in order to not really rock the boat, particularly due to the conflict aversion of Pisces. What is it when we look back to, say, before 2011 or before 2023 especially, that used to be important to us that either we have already released in some form, whether actively, overtly, or just personally? And have we done so because it truly reflected who we were, or have we done so because we feel that we perhaps had no other choice. A lot of that is what's starting to fall away this summer. But as we retrograde back, we're looking at that whole broad period of time. We're looking at what is it that we've learned from that? What is it that we can now assimilate as part of our experience? Not to accept it, certainly not, but to look at it very honestly as to what it is that we have done when it comes to our sense of values and the structure of our life. And then questioning ourselves, does it make sense? Is it what we want? If it's not, this is a really wonderful time to release that very intentionally in order to embrace the fact that all of the outer planets in the coming years are pointing to a much more active and insistent period of time. So let's go backward here and see some of the major themes that we have with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So one of the themes which is actually similar between Saturn and Neptune, in a sense, is that they both have some pretty strong conceptions of what is reality, what's real, how is that defined. With Saturn, that tends to be very mundane, but again, like I was saying, it has to do with what's already established, and then limited by the worldly general conceptions of what is important to consider. So material concerns, generally speaking, status concerns, matters of authority. Do certain people have the authority to contribute to human perspectives of what's real and what's not? What's important, what's not, what's meaningful, what's true, perhaps especially, and what's not, what's believable? Neptune has a very different conception of this. So again, Neptune is very universalizing. It's almost cosmologizing. So bringing this out so broadly beyond the Saturnine barriers that we can even reconceive of our sense even of what human nature is. So Neptune would argue that human nature, culture, society, things like this are too limited by the constraints of Saturn. There's a quote of Rob Hand that I know Rick Levine likes to quote, and I have this one written down somewhere because I absolutely love it, which is that while we conceive of Saturn as what's real and we conceive of Neptune as illusion, the reality of the situation, reality of course, is that Neptune is reality and Saturn is the illusion that there ever was one. The idea of that being that for the vast majority of our conception around what's important and real in our lives and in society, there's so much in that that is unnecessary, that is archaic, that is, in fact, a hindrance on possibility. And that's ultimately what the Saturn-Neptune conjunction reminds us of every 36 years. So what's possible? Again, these are both questions that both Saturn and Neptune would ask us individually, but the crux of that really comes up to the fore when we get that conjunction. And with the retrograde, this is going so internal. This is going so deep. And for all of us except the most insistent upon remaining in a state of denial for the sake of a sense of security, which is established on very old decaying ground of Saturn, which needs to be washed away by Neptune in order to reveal fresh parameters, to reveal a fresh foundation. So basically, to pull this together at this point, unless someone is truly stuck in a state of denial, for most of us, it will be increasingly unavoidable, and hopefully we can intentionally take some time out to perhaps journal around this or just think about this. We're going to be confronted with these deeply internal questions around whether or not the way that we've been living our lives, the way that we've been structuring our lives, is remotely in accordance with our deepest values, with compassion, with sensitivity toward others, or have we been going along to get along? Both sides of that are matters that we wind up seeing with Pisces, right? There's the positive side of it, which is truly living our values, living out our compassion. But I think that it's not hard to see right now that at least on a cultural level, some of us are failing on that. And by some of us, I mean some nations, not to blame everyone in any given nation, but it does seem like our compassion has been waning in recent years. So we've been failing on that front. Maybe not on a personal level, but collectively. And we usually don't want to be failing on either of these fronts. So this is ultimately an opportunity to tap back into that and to assimilate what we were on the positive side really supposed to get out of this transit, this past many years of transits of Neptune and then Saturn in Pisces. And hopefully, additionally, then with this retrograde, we can see opportunities to intentionally release the more passive to a fault aspects of going along to get along, or even being all consumed with something that looks really good and shiny, but ultimately is not real. Perhaps false promises, perhaps a tall tale that we have been sold. And again, this doesn't have to just be, and won't just be on this broad cultural level. We can see that, especially given the house placement, which we're going to talk about today more at the end as we go sign by sign. But the house placement of this conjunction is likely where, at least for about 15 years or so, we have run into repeatedly matters of deception, matters of complication, matters of unanswerable questions, unscrutable people, and a lot of confusion. Now, I wouldn't be surprised as well if over the past couple of years that Saturn has joined the mix, if that hasn't become something more clear. And that's, to me, a little bit of the interesting way that both of these energies can flip each other on the head. Both of them, in and of themselves, can represent something of deception. And yet, when we bring them together, because they are attempting so much to cancel each other out in so many ways, through the process of that conjunction, we are often left with a lot more clarity, a lot more of an awareness around where we may have been deceived or deceived ourselves. And that is that old decaying foundation of Saturn that needs to be washed away by Neptune. And so, pardon for the inconsistency in which symbol I'm using to separate these two, but these are the very typical kind of standard effects then that we usually feel on a personal and a collective level when we're dealing with a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And in my view, when I look at these things, I know that these look like they are negatives, but possibly not the crystallization of a new vision, but disillusionment is a good thing. If we are living with illusions, we should ideally want to be aware of those and want to release those. Now, if there are illusions that we are emotionally invested in, yes, that is upsetting, naturally. And I don't just want to brush that aside, but I do hope that we can look at this honestly and say, if I'm under an illusion, I would like to know, and I would like to be able to do something about that. I would like then to be able to change my mind. And we have full permission with a Saturn-Neptune conjunction to change our minds. That is where that realm of possibility lives. That's where any sort of deception lives, is in our minds. And we are called to change that. So the more that we are changing our minds, perhaps under this period of time, I would say the more credit that we should give ourselves around our embrace and positive utilization of this transit that we have the opportunity to tap into during this time. So disillusionment with the status quo. That is the negation of the falsehood of Saturn coming in from Neptune, typically. Neptune's coming in and saying, hey, you realize that the status quo is not all it's cracked up to be. There's probably even a bit of a house of cards situation going on with that. And not only is it a weak structure, but it's also an inhibiting or a hindering kind of a structure. And so that can be quite upsetting, especially when we realize that we have lived in accordance with an unnecessary status quo or an unnecessary set of parameters for ourselves or collectively for years or decades. It's natural to feel sad about that. And it's ultimately okay. That's the motivation that we can then pull from that disappointment motivating us to expand our horizons, to find something really real on both the Saturnian and the Neptunian side of that. Something that is in alignment and is possible in the world if we were to just strip away some of the status quo, which is no longer serving us. And with that disillusionment also then comes the flip side of that, taking action on that, which is the dissolution of structure, which is no longer being as heavily invested in collectively or personally than those structures which have given us a false sense of security wind up then falling away. And again, I would say with any transit, try to utilize it, try to act upon it, try to plan out where upon my life is this likely to act, and how can I perhaps internalize the lessons just by being told them and not by being shown them. And then how can I take action to realize what this transit is trying to bring to me so that I have a little bit more control over how that winds up playing out. So again, coming back to the realm of our working lives and the fact that I think that this conjunction in particular is likely to push a lot of people to go independent. Perhaps the importance or the significance of a specific type of a standard of living, which is defined based on what other people value, isn't ultimately what we want. And maybe we value our independence more and value the enjoyment of our labor, our productivity. Maybe we value that more than we do having a few years where maybe we would make more as an employee than as someone who's independent, for instance. I'm not saying that we should all take that path, but because I'm sure that quite a few people will wind up deciding to do that, I think it's pertinent to this. But we can see then how that would be a disillusionment, the illusion being that somehow it's because it's important to other people that you live in accordance with a certain style of a standard of living. Realizing, no, that's actually not really significant to me. I'm perfectly fine with not having this and that and this and that luxury in my life. What's actually a higher priority for me is a sense of freedom, a sense of control over my own life, a sense of being able to live in accordance with my values for the majority of my day. And then the dissolution of a structure of that previous foundation for your life, that then coming apart as well. Now, one thing I will also say with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, it's also okay to be afraid to take these leaps. Saturn-Neptune conjunctions will do this if you want to wait to be shown, that is also perfectly fine. But I do know that as human beings, we tend to like to take action and feel a little bit more in control of things. It's also, wonderful if you see a specific avenue or a specific part of your life that you're not quite as satisfied with, maybe just do the planning ahead of time to cushion a potential being shifted away from a specific path that you're currently on. We can plan around that too, without actually taking that leap, and then allow for Saturn-Neptune to push us when it decides, yes, you are definitely ready at this point. And then ultimately what that winds up turning into is this crystallization of a new vision of our lives. So what is it that we truly value? What is it that is ultimately really important to us? What are our boundaries? What is believable? What is true for us? What genuinely motivates us? What do we want for the story of our life to say? With Saturn helping then as well, the conjunction can be conflictual, but it can also be this kind of melding. The way that they meld together is the support system that Saturn can provide for the vision of Neptune. It can help to take that wild dream, that quote unquote impossible, and make it real. Now, something I want to quickly point out, just so that we can kind of know a little bit more. This is something that has always helped me quite a bit. Notice that we have these ST words: status quo, structure, crystallization. This is the Saturn side of this. The status quo, the structure, the crystallization. And then on the other hand, we have this disillusionment, dissolution, vision. This is the Neptunian side of this. And so we can even look at this kind of linguistically, I guess, is what that is, and get an intuitive sense of some of the energies that we're going to be dealing with these two as they get louder and louder, as they have this huge conversation, oftentimes argument with each other. So I want to talk about this 0 Aries point just a little bit more in a second here, and I probably will veer a bit more geopolitical when I get to that point. But I think for all of us, what is really important for us to think about with the conjunction generally speaking, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the retrograde in particular, but reality. What is real and meaningful? What is true? What is believable, motivating, or worthwhile to us personally and collectively? And then in terms of boundaries, what are the limits or challenges? What are the parameters of the culture that we live in, the society that we live in, the belief structure within which we live our lives? What are the limits of that? Just to kind of conceive of it. It doesn't mean that we need to negate any particulars or all of them or anything like that. If we can just kind of get our mind on it, like I was pointing out, where we tie in the United States personal worth to our jobs. That's a reality with which we can agree or disagree, but it is something that we could maybe mark as, yes, this is a parameter within which I am functioning. Maybe you can look at it and say, I fundamentally disagree with this. How can I perhaps contribute to a Saturnian structure which supports my Neptunian compassionate beliefs around the idea that people should be more supported and more valued as human beings in this world? Let me quickly point out, so with the retrograde, a lot of what we're going to be dealing with, specifically from approximately now through to the winter time on the 2025 side, the November-December period of time, is this question of whether or not we are clinging to outmoded beliefs, whether we're clinging to outmoded structures. That's where that denial comes in that I'm a little concerned about, because a lot of people are going to want to go back to a simpler time. They're going to want to sweep these things under the rug and pretend like we can unsee them or unknow them. And in that state of denial is likely to be a huge amount of nostalgia for when we did believe in these things, and grasping for a sense of comfort that is in the past, but that is that decayed Saturn structure. So try not to be gripping for that, because that's going to be washed away by this Neptune. But yeah, this desire to put the cat back in the bag, it's the cat was already a problem before it was let out of the bag. Putting it back in the bag isn't really going to help at all. And again, I think that we've seen a lot of this specifically. So when Neptune jumped into Aries, and when Saturn was getting closer and closer to it, and then wound up jumping into Aries as well, that was that March through May timeframe, when a lot of the perceived strength of the U.S. economy was shaken by the fact that, we can't just willy-nilly impose tariffs on a bunch of different countries. And our bonds, our economy, even our companies, are not quite as unimpeachable as we might assume. And so we need a new foundation. That's the cat that's out of the bag, but I have to say that, to put it very vaguely, those types of solutions are not going to be the way either. I think we generally kind of know that at this point. But in that, right, we can see the 0 Aries point coming up in this, which is the world point. This is a global, geopolitical, geoeconomic turning point that we are experiencing throughout these years. And this is going to carry on beyond that February of next year timeframe. Saturn and Neptune will continue to be co-present in Aries all the way until 2028, when Saturn finally moves on. So if we take the broadest conception of this, they have been co-present in Pisces since 2023, and they will continue to be co-present then following forward into Aries until 2028. And so I don't think that it's any surprise that there are large swaths of the world, especially the global south right now, that are calling for sovereignty over their own nations, that are calling for the global economy to no longer be fully in the hands of the United States based on the, US dollar reserve currency, based on the IMF loans and the structural adjustment programs that go along with those. Neptune is that reality that's coming in, which is that rights belong to all peoples to be independent. And Saturn is the illusion of a false reality of American exceptionalism, basically. This is 100% exactly how I expect this to be playing out, because we can kind of already see it, and we've already been dealing with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And this really started to ramp up around 2023. So I think we continue this process. I hesitate to mention any sort of weird stuff going on with our economy, because I know that it's been decades that things have been pretty wonky and pretty difficult in the United States for regular people. But the US labor force has actually been held back a huge amount also with the way that things have been since 1989 as well. And so I think that there's a lot of really wonderful things that can come through the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, even as it looks like, quote unquote, the US is slipping. It's not the US that's slipping, it's the US financial classes and their control over other countries, and then therefore also the population of the United States too. There's a lot to gain from not being in that position anymore. And also with that 0 Aries point, it is truly high impact, high visibility. This stuff is, especially as we get more into Aries, the cat is fully out of the bag. We're looking straight at the cat. We're looking straight at the bag. The situation is basically out in the open as to what it is that we're dealing with. On the other side of February, I think that there are very few illusions really left. There will still be some that are clinging to that, but it's just going to become less and less tenable to be holding on to the illusions of the past 36 years. And of course, this winds up fitting into what we will continue to discuss on this channel, which is the activity of this summer, and then even more activity of regular people and nations trying to create a sustainable future for ourselves. We should look at this as a really beautiful gift that we're being provided, being able to create that future of these beautiful alignments that we're dealing with, and particularly the minor grand trine, which is itself just stunning and unheard of, these back-to-back sign changes of the outer planets of Pluto, which has just gone into Aquarius, which is sextile to Neptune and Saturn, which have just gone into Aries, and then also sextile to Uranus, which, as of the day that I'm publishing this video, is going into Gemini, and then that Uranus being in a trine to Pluto there. Next year, next summer, we also then have Jupiter joining in on this alignment, where that will oppose Pluto, trine Neptune, and sextile Uranus to create a really beautiful basket aspect pattern. These are beautiful times, but because of the fact that the muddy grounds on which we have established the present, because of the fact that it is a kind of human inclination to be a bit afraid of the unknown, of the change, we can then grasp onto that and then continue to hinder ourselves along those lines. These changes are going to happen, and I don't think that we can get alignments as beautiful and as stunningly symmetrical as they are in the coming year without the ultimate benefit and ultimate support of that being humanity itself. So on an individual level, and this is what I'll be discussing with all of us on the sign by sign, for all of us individually and then collectively, things may fall away. And if they are, that is that decaying foundation. That is that muddy foundation on which things are settled. And so these things will not serve you sustainably. And so try to release those things which appear to be naturally falling away. It's also always good when we're dealing with Saturn, it's always good to try to be as responsible as possible. Generally speaking, when Saturn is really getting highlighted, we'll want to focus on especially the area of life that's indicated by the house that it's in, which we're going to discuss, but just try to be as real with yourself as you possibly can. That's another thing with these Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, is a sense of being truly real, truly authentic, truly aligned. With both of these retrograde as well, kind of across the board, delays and confusion are kind of a thing that is just going to be in the ether. So I super would not be surprised to see a lot of government gridlock. Again, this isn't just the US, this is a global thing. So it's likely that government, which it has a strong association with Saturn, right? That being in retrograde and then being conjoined to Neptune and crossing that 0 Aries border there are huge questions that are going to be coming up for governments to need to address in the coming months and so forth. And so I would not be surprised to see just huge delay of just not knowing what to do, especially because the fact that when these move back into the old sign of Pisces that they are ultimately trying to come out of, it's almost like it's going to be difficult to ascertain what the right choice for future sustainability will be, because it's dealing with the old energy. So I expect a huge amount of delays there and confusion. And also with business, that also being a Saturn thing. Hopefully this doesn't wind up impacting things like religious freedom and freedom of conscience, because then we could have Saturn restricting that Neptune as well, of that our conscience, right, and our belief. So hopefully that is not the case, but we could even see businesses not really knowing which way the wind is going to be blowing in the coming year or 2 or 3, and therefore also feel the need to delay some big decisions because they just don't know what choice to make. So we could wind up feeling like, okay, we've made some weird, interesting, apparent progress in the summer, and then feel like increasingly throughout the winter, as we will also then have Uranus go retrograde, it may almost feel like we're kind of stuck, and that it feels like it's almost impossible to move forward. I do feel like this winter is going to feel a lot less, at least December of 25 or so, that it's going to feel like we're coming up against more and more and more of almost a sense of inertia, I think is the word that I'm looking for with that. Or like we're moving through thicker and thicker and thicker water. So one thing I would recommend around that for all of us is the more that we get retrogrades kind of piling up on top of each other, which we will more and more in the autumn months for some years to come, if we try to push through that, typically we're spinning our wheels. So it is something of a permission slip to slow down a bit during those periods of time. So if you're confused about something and you don't know what decision to make, especially around any sort of foundational questions of your life, see if you can push off that decision, because it's very likely that, especially after February, we will have a much clearer view of what it is that we're dealing with anyway. This is also going to be a period of time in which we're really encouraged to let go of what no longer feels important or meaningful or satisfying to us, especially what doesn't feel real. And finally, I do want to point out, this transit will be hardest on those in denial. So people who want to kind of put their head in the sand, pretend that there is not a vast amount of change that is clearly being called for when we have all the outer planets changing signs, all within several months of each other. And then we also have that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I mean, just straightforwardly, it's inherently, there's no way for it to not be a period of an immense amount of change and redefinition. and refocus and redirection for all of us individually, and then for all of us collectively on every scale. So typically by the time we get to a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the old way, it just doesn't make any sense anymore. So the more that we can embrace this as a really wonderful gift to release what doesn't fit anymore and what isn't going to work for us going forward, the better off that we're going to be, the more of a sense of alignment and in flow that we're going to feel like we are. So lastly, before we jump into horoscopes, I do want to point out, because I realize I've referred to zero Aries. I assume that a lot of people know what I'm talking about, but I want to point it out visually just in case. So there's this 0 degrees, 0 minutes of Aries. That is what comes between Pisces and Aries. Usually the sun is there around the 19th or 20th of March. And this is one of, most would say, the most important one of the quote-unquote cardinal points, which are also referred to as world points. And that is 0 Aries, 0 Cancer, 0 Libra, and 0 Capricorn. But it all kicks off with Aries because it's the beginning of the zodiac. And so matters of significance globally tend to be highlighted by this place getting hit up pretty strongly. And this year has been absolutely nuts. So I'm going to pull in a few other things that happened this year that is setting us up for this conjunction at 0 Aries. So first off, we just had the nodal axis, which defines where the eclipses take place. We had it move from Libra and Aries, where it was giving us eclipses in the Libra and Aries seasons. It just went retrograde in February into Pisces, because it always moves retrograde, the nodal axis. And so now we're getting the eclipses along the Pisces and Virgo axis. But in this spring, we had an eclipse in Pisces, or an eclipse on the Pisces side, which was actually a lunar eclipse in Virgo, but that's beside the point. And then we had a solar eclipse in Aries. So that's also something of a straddling. We then had Mercury and Venus come through Pisces during approximately Pisces season. They went into Aries. They went about to 9 degrees of Aries, and then they retrograded back over this world point of 0 Aries. And then we had Neptune cross that 0 Aries point, and then we had Saturn cross that 0 Aries point, and now they're both going retrograde, also back over that 0 Aries point. And then these dates, the 26th of January of 2026, and then the 13th of February of 2026, that's when these two are again crossing that 0 Aries point. This is nuts that this is happening in this way. We usually don't get as much action as we have in this year and are going to have in this year on this point. And I think that we can all see that the world, it is a-changing, the times they are a-changing, and that is what that is speaking to. So it's called for, and it's aligned very beautifully, as we can see in some other videos that I've done. I don't have any of the other outer planets in here, but Pluto is right here. It just went into Aquarius for good last November. As of the day I'm publishing this, we have Uranus at 0 degrees of Gemini. These are aligned very beautifully for years to come, for about 5 years. And like I said, it's unheard of for the outer planets to all ingress basically simultaneously and all in these flowing supportive alignments with each other. And then Jupiter will be right here in the summer of 2026, and it will align at the exact degrees. Pluto will be at 4 degrees at that point of Aquarius, Neptune at 4 degrees of Aries, Uranus at 4 degrees of Gemini, and Jupiter will be at 4 degrees of Leo, and they'll all be in alignment with each other. It's setting us up for something beautiful. So much as Saturn and Neptune can be heavy energies, and usually we don't like that kind of a thing, I do really want to re-emphasize that there's something beautiful that is happening for humanity in this time. And the less rigid that we can be in our values and our beliefs, the less rigid that we can be about what is an acceptable story for someone to tell about the world, the more that we can kind of open ourselves up to understanding that, especially perhaps in the US, that other nations, other cultures have their values, and they should be allowed to live those values without the imposition of our values and our financial institutions upon them, on, you know, as boots on their necks, basically, the better and smoother that this is going to be. So try not to resist the gift to humanity by holding on too fast to the way that things have been. We can do better. That's what Saturn-Neptune says. So with all of that said, I do want to thank you all so much for being here, spending this time with me. I am going to basically sign off to the collective here, since we all wind up then jumping to our timestamps and going our separate ways. If you enjoyed this video and you enjoy your horoscope and everything, then if you don't mind giving the video a thumbs up, I would greatly appreciate that. It helps the algorithm to let it know that you enjoyed the video, and that helps to spread the video around, which helps the channel to grow, and I greatly, greatly appreciate that. Also, maybe consider sticking around by subscribing for future videos. I would love to have you here. And of course, thank you all so much to the members of the channel: Angel Niblock, Michelle Howell, JJ, Deborah Keel-Leavitt, Gary A., Startlingly True, Patrick McKenney, Jody, Anne Marie, C. Rezer, P. Sal, Maria Serrell-Hyro, Rachel Windholtz, Lisa S., Aya, the Z-Man 1291, Lynn Newman, Long T. Standing, the Nelson Cat Maya, Connie DiMartino, Dali Gizi, Mango JT, B. Love, Grace, Fluffy Cut, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Aquarian Antiquarian, Speak Up Anthony, also I believe of Lone Wolf Astrology, Susan Martin, Jonathan Mason, Chad Wiseman, Ezekiel David LaRosa, On the Road, and Adrienne K. Thank you all so much. Much love to you for your support for the channel. And if you guys are interested in memberships, there's information in the description box below. And other than that, I hope that this transit treats you super well, and I will talk to you all very soon. And do be good. All right, so for Aries, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction going retrograde from your first house into your 12th. And so for me, these two houses have a pretty special relationship with each other. To me, they are both major aspects of the self, of oneself. The 12th house can go even bigger than that, of like your connection to the universe, your connection to spirit as well. But it's also the unconscious, the subconscious of the individual, whereas the conscious mind tends to show up in the first house. So these are kind of twin aspects of ourselves, that which we tend to hide or mostly experience in isolation or with people who are really, really, really deeply trusted, as well as things that we tend to hide from ourselves, usually not consciously. We can see conditioning show up here. We can see like tendencies that we have to be difficult to ourselves because of not really desiring to look at something in particular. So for instance, addictions and like troubling patterns of behavior and habits and things like this, those also tend to show up in the 12th, and it's usually just because we don't really want to look at it. We might feel like we're too busy to deal with some of the stuff that goes on with the 12th house as well. So that's one theme that I would kind of expect to have come up for you around this time, which is this kind of area here where it's about you, and it's about how you show up in the world with the first house. But there's also this thing underlying that's coming up for a review of like, have you looked at the way that you have been conditioned in life? Have you looked at what it is that you jump to automatically, naturally, when you are playing out a scenario in your mind around, this is how this could play out? is your default to expect that things will go well? Is your default to expect that things will go badly? Or are you kind of open to possibilities and not necessarily boxing yourself one way or the other? So it's likely that there's going to be a lot that is basically being processed really deeply for you during this time. Now, I think in a way that kind of makes sense with that, you may find yourself kind of returning to that solitude, returning to spiritual, or when it comes to like emotional, psychological well-being kind of work, or the responsibilities that you hold to yourself internally, right? So coming back to that to do a lot of that processing. It's likely that this period of time will have you maybe a little bit less social or less like showing up in a big way outwardly in your life. I hope that makes sense. I don't know why this is such a tortured way of me just trying to say, I think you'll be spending more time alone to process that basically. Now, there may even be some big questions around like your own sense of your own authority that are also coming up. The 12th can also be an area of life where we feel like we're not fully in control of it. And so this could even be like self-doubt could wind up coming up, or fears or little anxieties or little pangs of any sort around feeling like you're not fully in control of your life, which of course, on a lot of levels, none of us really are. But if it's something that's particularly uncomfortable for you to feel, also really worth taking some time to kind of look at that, because you're likely to get a lot of really wonderful clarity out of this transit around not only what that is, but a vision of a way, a plan to correct for that. And so do you feel that you carry leadership and authority naturally? Is there anything going on with your sense of self-image, which, again, this can be kind of difficult because usually it's not quite in the conscious mind, but these may be inhibitions that you think are just natural, that everyone has, that might not actually be as universal as you think that it is, basically. So kind of digging into that, especially around like how you carry authority, because that's Saturn, and the Saturn transiting through your first house that you're going to be dealing with for a couple of years to come is really about how you carry authority. It can have you doing so in a way that's a lot more natural, or that you feel like, oh, I can handle a whole lot of more responsibilities than I previously thought that I was. And so it can really put you in touch with that. But during this period of time, as we're dealing with this retrograde, I think it would be really helpful to set you up well for that transit, to just go over any sort of subconscious thoughts that you may have about that. Maybe you are even the type that inherently is not that fond of authority, in which case, same. So I get that. But is that also then kind of undermining your confidence in your own ability to strongly speak for yourself and take up the space which is genuinely yours to take, where you don't necessarily need to impose your authority on others just because you are intentionally asserting your own self-authority, right? So additionally, these two, as they've been in your 12th, they may have been releasing some dreams, or again, they've been going through this place of your conditioning. And so they may have, on the one hand, been releasing some conditioning, which would be wonderful, anything that was unnecessary, or they may have been releasing possibilities due to the detours that were coming up in this 12th house, probably due to, again, conditioning. So is there something that you have desired for that you feel in the past few years you have decided is unimportant? It's not necessarily, unless you genuinely feel that way now. But if it is a sense of, I was conditioned to want that, and now I feel like I'm more clear about the fact that I don't genuinely value that, then this is kind of coming back to maybe think that through once more, and probably, I would assume, it will be a great kind of confirmation of that. That's one thing that that I think is actually kind of cool, is like when we get these last bits of a transit in a given house, when a planet, especially an outer planet, winds up going retrograde across the sign barrier again. What's cool is that the first end of that transit, usually you have some sense of a greater clarity in that area of your life, right? The bad parts of it have played out, pointed out some problems. The good parts of it have played out, probably redirected you in some way. But as we go forward, sometimes I think that we can forget what it felt like to have that transit going on, or we can forget what it felt like to deal with the energies that we were dealing with when it came to that. And so as we go forward, we can start to question ourselves, especially with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in your first. There can even be a weird kind of self-doubt that can play out just with that alone. And so you might be like, well, was that really so bad? And then kind of get back in touch with that, whatever that was, and be like, yeah, no, you know what? Not worth it. I don't want this, you know? And so then you're given that greater confirmation or sense of certainty for you to take with you to put in your pocket as you go forward. So yeah, if I were to boil this down to a few words, I would say it's genuinely and deeply about a sense of certainty in yourself, both the mind and the psyche and the invisible, the hidden parts of you, your emotions, even your spirituality, and then yourself in the world and how you interface with the world. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. But I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Aries. So I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for being here. Okay, so for Taurus, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction retrograding from your 12th house, where it's going to be for some years to come. It's going back into your 11th house, where it's been for some years. And so this is running between the house of your subconscious, that which you keep held hidden, but can also be a part of yourself which is even hidden from your conscious mind. So to me, there's a lot of conditioning and things like this that wind up showing there. This can also be a place of isolation. Oftentimes, to me, there's productive isolation in this point. So something can be kind of pulling you away from others for you to do something on your own, which is of significance to you, and you might not even share with others that you're doing this. It's also, to me, a place that can feel like we're not in control of it. And so we can sometimes feel like we are at the mercy of what's going on in this house. Now, it's then retrograding back into your 11th house, which has to do with friends, allies, group affiliations, the groups to which you feel like you identify, and then also hopes, dreams, aspirations, things like this. And so this is an interesting kind of a crossing here, where it's been in this very socially oriented house of the 11th, and now it's going into this place of your subconscious and you alone, right? So with it now retrograding back into this social house, it's very likely that these group dynamics are going to become of more significance yet again. And so you may even find this would be kind of an interesting way that I would not be surprised to play out, would be for you to share some ideas that are of significance to you, or a project or something that you're working on, or some feeling that you have, or like sharing your emotions in some form or fashion, whether your emotions are tied to a creative project, whether they are tied to some spirituality or ideology or something that you're studying that's important to you, sharing that, or something along those lines. I'm sure you can kind of fill in any of the gaps there. Something that is important to you that is kind of sparking your interest in a way that you don't fully have control over. You may find yourself sharing something about that with friends in the coming months, and I would hope that that goes over well. But what I would not also be surprised to see is that it doesn't as much, and that maybe you feel like you are misunderstood around what it is that you're doing or pursuing or your interest. Maybe you get something of a, oh, that's weird, kind of a response to it. And that can then wind up reinforcing your decision in the coming years to just do this in your own space and not share it as much with other people, because of the fact that that would definitely check pretty much all of those boxes. So additionally then, with these two in retrograde in this house, those group dynamics, they're likely to be a little bit unclear. They're likely to feel somehow murky in some way, and even disillusioning. So you may feel like, I don't know why, but I just don't feel aligned with these people anymore. You may feel like, I don't know why, but I just don't feel like I trust what's going on with someone or some people. If that's the case, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to take some strong action around that, but just try to trust the senses that you're getting that are coming up, because it's likely, if you're feeling that way, that probably the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is trying to, as gently as it can, unless you ignore it, and then maybe a little more forcefully pull you in a different direction away from something that you just don't feel fit anymore. Now, I'm just now realizing that I worded this kind of weird. I don't mean that, obviously, in a literal sense. But yeah, so friends may wind up then falling away, or there may, with these retrogrades, even be some people coming back into the fold. And it may be initially unclear as to why that is. But again, there's something about a redirection. I almost said a misdirection. So again, I hate to say, and I wouldn't shut people out based on the fact that I'm saying this right now, but I would not be surprised if there is something of a re-engagement with people that is ultimately serving to remind you why you're not satisfied with it. I hope that's not the case. But again, like I'm saying, man, that would be checking like all the boxes in terms of significations here. Now, you may also then feel pulled back into communities or causes. One thing that I would expect also with this for some people is the 11th house can have to do with groups and causes. The 12th house can speak to being of compassionate service to others. So you may feel yourself really called to charity work or volunteer work or something like that as well, that really speaks to a value or cause that you hold quite dear to you and that you feel is somehow serving a purpose that you feel drawn to, where you feel like you are of service to others. This could also, this little pop back into Pisces, also would not be surprised to see that you've had a plan or goal or something like this that has started to crystallize in recent years with Saturn joining Neptune in this place. So a new goal that you feel like, yes, I can do this. I can be super responsible and follow all of the steps here and make this happen and make it real. This last little pass of these two back into that place and then forward, I wouldn't be surprised if those plans or goals are shifting in some way. Now, this doesn't mean that you are saying, I don't want to do that anymore. I would actually expect that it is more so I have started to run with that, and I have realized that there are certain aspects of this that are simply unnecessary and that don't feel very aligned. So for instance, if you have been wanting to do something independent and you had a plan of, I'm going to be making this salary at this point from whatever this is, right? You may have run with that, but you may have also recognized, when I do that, when I'm pushing for that, I have less time for these other aspects of life that I really enjoy and that are important to me, and that are in part a lot of the reason why I chose to go in this direction anyway, because I wanted to have maybe more control over my life or something like that. And maybe you are now realizing, hey, you know what? I'm doing all right where I am. So as long as I'm maintaining, we're all good. And then if there's a slow climb beyond that, then all the better. But maybe you're kind of taking your foot off of the gas quite so much, or just something like that. Maybe it's even completely opposite. Maybe you are coming back to like, man, I feel like I've just gone all in on a project. I feel like it's taken over my life. I feel like I'm not socializing anymore, et cetera, et cetera. And then come back to this and be like, I'm going to make time for my friends and blah, blah, blah. And you do so. And then you're like, yeah, no, I can see why this wasn't really all that important to me before. And maybe this project really is kind of the be all and end all for me for now, you know? So I think that there's going to be a little bit of a pivot, probably more likely to be a specific aspect of something rather than something going away whole cloth, because that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in your 11th, that already created something that's definitely real. It's just that you're probably tweaking around the edges with this. So finally then, like I said, when it comes to your group affiliations, stuff like that, when you're doubling up on your 11th house, and then that's moving on and doubling up on your 12th, I would kind of expect that in this broader year period, plus minus several months, so 2025, 2026, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a major shift away from some affiliation, some of your social life. And a lot of that is probably going to be super tied to whether you feel that something is genuinely aligned with you. Remember how Saturn and Neptune together are what is real. Is it real? If so, excellent. If not, it's just not a priority, you know? So yeah, I think that is mostly what I have for you, Taurus. So I hope that this was helpful and made sense. I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for being here. Okay, so for Gemini, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction retrograding from your 11th house to your 10th house. So your 11th house has to do with generally friends, group affiliations, benefactors, as well as hopes, dreams, aspirations, things like this. Whereas your 10th house has to do with the direction in which you're trying to drive your life. So often this is associated with career, because that's usually where we're climbing and pushing. But to me, it speaks to what is of the most importance to you to achieve in your life. So reputation, role, your position, and what it is that you're trying to achieve. So this whole broader area is very much about your place in the world, basically, right? So your place in groups and so forth, and then your role, right? So with the retrograde of Neptune and Saturn from that 11th back to the 10th, there may have been a kind of group dynamic or like a networking or a community that you have been trying to establish or connect with in probably your professional life, though every time I bring up profession when it comes to this, definitely feel free to take liberties and apply that to something else that is of similar significance to you. So there is probably this sense of like trying to create a group of something or a community around something that is important to you. where you may be pulling back a little bit from that to focus on your own goals for a bit. And to focus on them, I don't necessarily mean just to pursue those absent the group, but more so I mean to reconsider what your goals are, what your aspiration is, and then how that aspiration winds up playing into social connections. So, are you still aligned? Are you really aligned with the groups that are around you? Are your friends helpful and supportive of your goals? Do your friends contribute to benefit your reputation? If they hinder it, probably you're going to wind up leaning away from that, because this is really about readjusting reputational, legacy-oriented aspect that was crystallized in the past few years. So there's that general, pulling a little bit back from the social dynamic that's going on for you with regard to your pursuits. So with that kind of being able to be set aside here, now what we're dealing with is, okay, what are your aspirations? What are you motivated to do? What do you want your reputation to be? And so on and so forth. And then the aspirational or hope, dream kind of an aspect of that with the 11th house too. And so it's really all about how are you aligning to a very real sense of what your purpose is. That has probably become more clear to you in recent years because of that Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's been going on in your 10th recently. You've probably been pushed into certain roles that have a greater sense of self-authority or responsibility that you're carrying. And you may feel one way or another about that, but likely at this point you feel like, okay, that's something that I can do, that's something I can run with. The level of responsibility and authority might feel workable or functional. And so now you might even be kind of opening your vision to other possibilities that have come up in recent months as you've started to get that Saturn-Neptune conjunction now in the 11th, which is bringing in, okay, but what is this going to look like 10 years down the line? That's kind of cool. Like, what do we maybe want to aim at now? How do we want to broaden this? Is there any sort of a group dynamic that you're wanting to pull into that? Is there a community that you're wanting to get into? Is there a different kind of lifestyle maybe that you're wanting to create from this as well? Maybe you're even looking at, how can I tweak what I'm doing in order to be able to do that for my own benefit, but then maybe even try and figure out ways that I can intentionally benefit society with that too. So there's a lot here about crystallizing these ideals that you're following, about figuring out when it comes to your ambitions, like, yes, I know that today these are my options, but I can also look several years down the line and say, well, as long as I do what's possible today and tomorrow and the next day and so on, then I can see what's possible for me about, 10 years down the line or whatever is going to be something different. So let me go ahead and aim for that, and maybe even visualize that or something like that. And so not only are you taking on the kind of day-to-day responsibility, but hopefully you are also feeling into a sense of confidence that you can have about taking responsibility also for your goals and getting yourself there, right? So one of the things that might come up then with this as well is if you have any insecurities around that, or if you have any, again, the limitations that sometimes we place upon ourselves of, oh, no, that's not for me, or, oh, well, I don't, basically different versions of that's not for me, right? The things that we tell ourselves about limitations which are not real. I'm hoping that you don't, but you may feel some of those things start to creep up again. There may be a little bit of weird doubt or things like this that wind up cropping up. I also would not be surprised, hate to say it, but keep in mind This is just a transit. It's going to go direct again, and it'll be normal and good again. This isn't the new normal that I'm about to describe, but you may even feel like you have overextended yourself professionally as well, where you may feel like, okay, what is this slowdown? Is this like a new, like, is this a problem that is just going to continue? I would say almost certainly not. And I would expect that in the winter time, you will see that shift start to get a lot better. So if that comes up, I'm bringing it up hesitantly because I know that sometimes when we talk about these things, they can happen. But if it does come up, it's just a temporary thing. And hopefully try not to let that bring up old insecurities, questions that maybe you had going into something of, am I ready? Maybe not. Try not to let any sort of a wonky slowdown take you back to that place, right? Because we're trying to get into the 11th house here, which is really lovely. Now, there may even be something that winds up coming up around, like I was saying with the overextension, it's almost like there's a pushing really hard forward that again is great and wonderful and will be reflected starting next year too. Like it'll be reinforced as we go forward, but there may be a like need to pull back. So the tension between visibility and integrity, you may find like there could be some qualms about marketing. There could be some qualms about like the way in which you are trying to grow yourself professionally. So you may certainly be finding that you have been, say, welcomed into a sort of professional circle or community or something like this. And then you find, oh, they treat this other group of people in a weird way, and I don't love it. And I'm not sure that I can continue with that. I'm not sure how sustainable that is. These would be the kinds of questions that would be coming up because you're getting now pulled back into the 10th of, is this what you want for your future? Are these people really going to be helping you? Because if they're treating other people in that way, then they probably just treat people in that way behind their backs, right? So there's probably also something around integrity that's going to be coming up for you around your ambitions and your aspirations around this time. Now, I think that, there may even be like a really wonderful way in which you're able to take those really beautiful ideals as well that are getting driven up by these two in the 11th house and pull that back into the 10th too. So that could also be a bit of pause, pull this energy back into the 10th. Yes, I can see this is the direction that I want to go in. It feels really right for me. So let me go ahead and redefine that, especially if it's a tweak around the edges, and then allow for that to be much more in alignment with a genuine sense of what success and mastery means for you within your own life. It's probably not going to fit perfectly into a group ideal, and it may recently have looked like it might because of the fact that those two are going into the 11th and group dynamics should be going interestingly pretty okay. But you may be being pulled back to just point out, okay, but don't get carried away such that you're getting carried out of alignment, right? So there's something about that that's coming up really significantly around, again, your aspirations and your ideals about your future. But yeah, I hope that all makes sense. And I think that's pretty much what I have for this. So I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Cancer, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction moving from your 10th house back into your 9th house. And so this, to me, really speaks of kind of going back to the drawing board, trying to get some of the underlying ideals or your kind of vision back on track, basically. So when we're dealing with the 10th house, this has to do with your future ambitions. So what it is that you are trying to create of yourself in the world, your role, your position, your reputation, your legacy. And often that winds up going into the direction of your career. but it can be beyond that. We also then have the ninth house here, which is all about expanding your horizons. It's about your ideological or your worldview kind of foundation. It's the place of your beliefs about yourself and the world and things like this. And it's also then where you tie into the broader world. So in terms of your background of knowledge, your background of belief, your connection with your culture, other people's cultures, faraway places, and basically anything that winds up pushing you beyond what's familiar. So this is a very idealistic, belief system oriented place. And then this is where it's enacted in the world, right? So often we see like higher learning here and then profession here, and we can see how that winds up feeding into it of, I was interested in this topic, and so now that's what I'm doing professionally, right? Or at least that's how it used to be. So there's something of like coming back to a matter of beliefs or worldview that is underpinning the direction that you're trying to drive your life toward. So there's this return to these thoughts, this return to what is the belief system foundation from which I'm trying to grow. And so that could come in the sense of some lingering doubts that you may have about whether or not what it is that you're pursuing is genuinely in alignment with your belief system or your worldview, your ideals, things like this. So is it in alignment with you, what it is that you're trying to do out in the world? That's that kind of back to the drawing board of what is the reason, what's the why behind what I'm doing? And kind of coming back to that to get a little bit more clarity or even just a little bit more confirmation if some doubts wind up arising there. Now, you may also feel yourself kind of being pulled back for a little bit from a venture that you have recently been pursuing. This may be something of feeling like there's a distraction that you're needing to address first, or this may be a sense of, I want to go back and double check. Like, for instance, if you are starting some kind of a new venture and you have a background in business or finance or something like that, you may go out and try and do that and then be like, wait, am I really clear on this? Kind of coming back to the basics a bit and then pushing forth when you have that confirmation that, yeah, I definitely know what it is that I'm doing here. So also then with the ninth house, we get themes of academia, legal things, international matters. So plans along all of these lines are likely to have a bit of a shift. So there could be some delays. There might be some confusion around this. There may be a sense of being put on pause, or most likely what this is all speaking to is a need to revise. So again, like I was saying, you may have a background in business and maybe you're doing that, you're pursuing something now, but there's like this revising of that understanding. There could also be some like legal documents or setting something up. There could be some need for certification, for instance. That's also like a legal thing that you need before you can get started. Or if you have any sort of like international aspect of what it is that you're doing as well, you may be revising that or reviewing that. For instance, maybe there are regulations in different places that you need to understand in multiple different ways, something like this. You may even be feeling like you're being pulled away from a venture in order to need to go travel somewhere or do something. You may also have just felt, generally speaking, even if this isn't like a new venture or something like this, more focused on your career recently. Maybe there's been a lot more responsibility placed upon you. Maybe your role has been blurring upward a bit where there's a potential for a promotion or something like that. And so you're kind of taking on different types of work or something. And maybe that's been a lot of your focus in recent months. And you may feel like there are some more fundamental aspects of your life and your personality, a desire for learning, greater knowledge, greater connection, expansion of yourself personally, spiritual or philosophical aspects of your personality as well that maybe you've been backburnering, and this is bringing you like, okay, yes, we've established that new foundation. It's kind of more natural now. So maybe you're kind of coming back to some of these more abstract areas of life that might even be a little bit more important to you when it comes down to it than the career growth that you probably have started to experience already, but definitely will wind up experiencing in the coming years. So kind of coming back to, okay, what is my why with all of this? So then again, the vision, the ideals that you have for yourself, for your life, coming back to that, to ground that into your plans, and then to assimilate and integrate that more into how you are going to be pursuing a greater sense of purpose or calling in the world, how you are going to establish that along the foundation of your ideals and your vision for your own personal growth, and then possibly even how is that all playing into your sense of your worldview and making the world a better place as well. That may be even, I wouldn't be surprised if that is a specific thing that winds up coming up for you around this time, is like you might have a specific career path in mind, just to use a specific example of career here. And you may also then have a pretty strong set of personal values and ideals when it comes to your worldview, right? And you may be like pursuing your professional path and things are going pretty well, and yet feeling this desire to integrate these things, to sew these things together, so that as you are climbing ladders or however you may want to have a metaphor for career advancement or your pursuit of the kind of future, the kind of life that you're trying to create for yourself, your sense of ambition and what that's driving you toward, wanting to carry along all those steps with you, your worldview and your sense of connection with the world, basically, your sense of being able to grow with your sense of almost being of service to the world as well. So those things, basically, they're getting tied together, sewn together in the coming months. And that should shore you up a lot for when we get into 2026, when you're really taking off with Saturn and Neptune in your 10th house. So yeah, I would stay really open to any sort of questions, or even maybe a little bit of confusion could wind up coming in around how do my beliefs fit into my life that I'm trying to create for myself. If you have any sort of career delays, or, oh, there's all these extra steps I hadn't considered that I need to do before I can really take off, I would just really try to embrace that. It's called for around this period of time. And really, it's trying to make sure that you are very focused on what is important or meaningful or satisfying to you truly, deeply, and especially as an expansive and growing human being in the world. How is it that you can take that with you and fuel your ambitions with that as well? But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Cancer. So I hope that made sense, and I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Leo, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction going retrograde in your 9th house and going back into your 8th house. So this is quite interesting because of the fact that the 8th house can have a lot to do with entanglements or vulnerabilities, where it is that you are dependent on or entangled with other people. This can also be a place of emotional connection, like deep emotional connection with other people, but also then the psychological dynamics of other people and emotional dynamics of other people as well. And some side things, research can show up here, digging into things, things that are outside of yourself and a bit hidden from you. So that's the 8th house. The 9th house is very different from this, where it's a place of personal expansion of your horizons, expansion of your mind and your knowledge and your sense of connection with the world. And so this feels to me something like that you have felt recently liberated a bit from something you felt tied to, or at least that you have been able to assimilate the sense of comfort with that, a sense of certainty around that. And you feel like you've been released into a bit more of a sense of like personal expansion of, yes, this is the way that I want to grow, that I personally want to grow, especially if you have felt like in recent years you've been bogged down, so to speak, in the concerns of other people and what they're needing rather than what you are for the sake of the lightness of your spirit, basically what you really want for yourself. So there may be the sense of, okay, I freed myself. Oh, I'm kind of getting pulled back in to some concern of someone else or some entanglement or something like this. So you might be wrapping up some loose ends if that is the case. But other than that, this can just bring those issues up again. Even if it doesn't feel like an either or kind of a situation, it's just bringing these 8th house topics of emotional, financial entanglements up again to be dealt with. And when those planets are in retrograde, it is likely to be especially murky around those themes. But ultimately, this is trying to wrap that up so that you don't have to deal with it when you're going forward. Now, you may also then be dealing with these questions around like karmic debts and things like this too, of, yes, I want to expand forward, but I do need to address this first. So in a very literal sense, this could be like planning a trip, planning a vacation or something like this, planning a big move, and yet maybe there are some literal financial material debts that need to be covered before you're able to actually act upon that. But then if we make that a little bit more abstract, this could be, I'm really looking forward to this growth and taking that very seriously, basically with Saturn there as well, of pushing yourself into new horizons and so forth. But you may feel like, okay, as I'm pushing forward with this, I can feel there's still some baggage with me. So this is then going back to deal with that so that you can move forward without that weight. I also would not be very surprised to see some boundary matters coming up, especially in close connections. And again, that's coming up as a theme that is then allowing you greater freedom in the 9th house. So it's difficult to expand your horizons when people are encroaching on your boundaries, right? So trying to create the space that you need personally to grow. Now, I also do want to bring this up. If you feel like there's a weight that has recently been lifted from you, that's likely to be somewhat associated with this, right? Having moved into the 9th, which is, I think, probably a more pleasant experience. I do want to warn you a little bit that you might be feeling more in the old energy for a few months here, but try not to fret and try your best not to get sucked down into that or expect for that to just continue, because that will let up again once that conjunction moves into Aries again. And if you find yourself in that place again, now that you know and have maybe built a little bit of muscle memory about this new kind of fresh way of being, hopefully you can now take a bit of a detached view of that general mood or that state of being, which might have felt claustrophobic or hindering or something like this, where maybe you're trying to meet other people's expectations or you're concerned about that or something like that. Maybe you can take a little bit more of a detached view this time and just kind of observe it, maybe journal about it and try to release it as it comes up with a lot of intention. Because it's coming up so that you can heal it, so that you can move on less burdened by that energy. And then ultimately just coming back to reevaluate who or what you want to be entangled with, right? So there may have absolutely been a big purge in recent years with Saturn and Neptune in your 8th around connections that you felt weren't really good for you or didn't really align with your values, or maybe you feel like you were connected to some people that expected for you to be compassionate toward them, but then didn't return that. Something along those lines. And maybe you even wound up like signing up for something and you felt like this was more of a burden than it was worth. This is really then about looking back at that, reevaluating that. There may even be some additional energies that you're desiring to release or to kind of wrap up as something that's connected to you. Or additionally, you may have, again, if you have purged people specifically recently, you may have someone arise again, like into your life. And I do have to warn, there may be a little bit of deception around, oh, they're different now. Oh, it's better. Oh, they've learned something like this. And then it's almost a fuller confirmation than you could have had if they didn't step back in that, yeah, no, I do want to leave that in the past. I would ultimately expect for that to be your ultimate conclusion at some point. I will throw that out there, but maybe not. Always leaving ourselves open to possibility. But yeah, I would just really, really, really go with your gut when it comes to other people and whether they are truly on the up and up throughout this retrograde period. But ultimately, when it comes to the retrograde itself, the highlights, I would say, is just being able to like really reevaluate what's going on under the surface and how things can impact your energy, and then cleaning that up in this period of time. And then a lot of the rest of the highlight of it is just, it'll be temporary, and then you're moving on to a much nicer thing with Saturn and Neptune moving into your 9th permanently. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Leo. So I hope this made sense, and I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. Okay, so for Virgo, we have a very interesting alignment showing up here. So Saturn and Neptune will be going retrograde from your 8th house into your 7th. And this is interesting because the sense that I get from it is that there's almost this commitment that may have been made recently, or getting entwined with something that you might be reevaluating and kind of pulling back from, bringing that a bit more into the light so that you can reevaluate whether you really want to be involved in it. That is umbrella, kind of what I would expect from this kind of a thing. Now, some of the things that may happen kind of specifically would be that you are reevaluating, again, the connections that you want to have, but more on this basis of what is up with other people? What are they dealing with? What are they going through? And do I really need to take that on myself, right? So what is your ideal kind of a partnership? There may be a sense here, especially in recent years, of having been connected to people who were somehow dependent on you or felt like they were trying to have you dependent on them, which, full disclosure, that is almost always that they are actually dependent on you in a way. If that has been something of an energy, you may be now looking at the psychological dynamics of that and what that might be saying about some of the people that you're connected with, possibly even going into what does that say about a pattern of relationship that you may engage with kind of regularly. So that back and forth over that 8th and 7th house cusp is probably bringing, again, the psychological dynamics of your connections more into sharp relief. And then you may be deciding to release some of your connections based on the thought process that you're basically going through with that. I think I mentioned in all of the videos for you recently about these transits that are coming up for you, where these two are going into your 8th house, around how it would be probably number one best thing that you could do in the coming few years would be to dig a little bit more into the psychological dynamics of other people. And you can do that with YouTube videos and things like this around how people relate to others and what some of the signs are for people that you might want to avoid having around. because sometimes that's not just as straightforward, clear as we might assume. And you may have, like, this elusive person, you may have someone that is a little bit mysterious or kind of hides things a bit. They may ghost and so forth, that winds up coming back around again, and it's speaking to a relationship pattern that they're coming back to try to show to you, basically. Not overtly, they probably won't tell you that. They almost certainly won't tell you that. But that's the energy of why that is coming back, is to resolve something of a pattern with someone who might be possibly even underhanded, consciously, unconsciously, whatever. It's really about outcomes, right? So someone like that may come back into your life as well. And this is ultimately about clearing up any sort of confusion about boundaries in your relationships when it comes down to it. And doing so by clarifying expectations, right? So are your expectations in alignment with someone else's? The best way to figure that out is to speak about this all very openly. And if you get a weird vibe, or someone isn't being honest, or someone keeps putting that off, or they are, again, elusive about that kind of thing, that's probably a pretty solid sign that maybe you don't want to so much be dealing with that. Now, there's also, though, with this, the potential to kind of clarify and redefine relationships. And it doesn't just have to be romantic partnerships. This can be friends. This can be with relatives. This can be with business partners, people that you are close to and have a one-on-one relationship with. So this is really about clarifying a lot of those connections, and where there may be misunderstandings on your side, on someone else's side, to just get that all out into the open. If you feel like there's been stuff that hasn't been out in the open, that's what the 8th house is all the relationship stuff, all the other people stuff that's a bit murky or foggy. Doesn't necessarily have to be bad, but is a little bit more difficult to see. Whereas the 7th house is very much out in the open. So that's why I keep saying, like, the best thing that you can do with this is to just be super honest and very clear about things, and then let the pieces fall where they may, because that's going to give you the best scenario to be dealing with as you have these two going through your 8th house and bringing up a lot more questions then as well about how it is that you relate to others, how they relate to you, and making sure that that is as aligned as possible with how you truly want to be treated and how you truly want to connect with other people. So that's being ultimately really clarified by this broader Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And now it's a little bit less of who do you want to be connected with, and more how do you want to feel with those connections, and how do you get there together. So there's a really wonderful opportunity then to build that kind of connection, to build that kind of compassion that is a little bit healthier or less codependent or less blurry or murky. And so again, I would just say this time around with the retrograde, getting stuff out in the open is great, but the more that you can run with that in the coming years as well, I think the better that that's going to wind up being. And I think, like, big shock, surprise, this is going to be the first time where you might be one of the shorter horoscopes. I have this habit of making the Virgo reading super long, but, well, now you're going back into 7th house. And for some reason, I always just like, okay, quick and easy, pretty much with the 7th house. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Virgo. So I hope this made sense, and I hope it was helpful. I hope this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Libra, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction going retrograde from your 7th house into your 6th house. So the 7th house generally has to do with other people, close one-on-one relationships. This can be romantic partners, close friends, business partners, anyone that is quite close to you. Whereas the 6th house has to do with our routines, our daily tasks, our work, our health, So general activity that we feel like we need to do, that we need to take care of, right? And so the general sense that I have from this, where these two are going retrograde over this cusp here, is probably around what you feel like the expectations that other people place upon you are. And so there's a lot of like questions around that, basically, of does it feel like other people are placing the burden of what they are needing to have done on you? Do you feel like you are serving others in such a strong way that you're almost taking responsibility for other people's concerns upon you, where maybe they should be handling those themselves? So that's number one. If that seems like it's becoming frustrating or burdensome, then 100% this is bringing that up for you to really reconsider that and maybe make some boundaries around your activity, your action, your effort a little bit more clear. With that said, there's a need for clarity around questions of work, health, service with these two retrograde when they're in the 6th house. So that's just going to kind of come up as a theme. You've recently been dealing with the two of them in your 6th house for quite a while, where they've already been kind of working on that theme. You're just coming back for a review at this point and to clarify anything around the edges that you basically need to, especially if you've created a pretty solid routine for yourself and then somehow connecting with others or sensing a greater responsibility toward others has interrupted or kind of twisted that in a way where you feel like, no, I need to come back to this and assimilate both of those things, where I'm taking care of my own stuff that I need to take care of, but I'm also able to manage my relationships well in a way that is hopefully a solid, equal give and take, right? There may even be some burnout or emotional overwhelm that you feel with people too, where, again, I think that's going to be a lot around people's expectations on you, and keeping in mind that sometimes that's not as much on other people's side as we might expect, especially for a Libra rising, where there's Aries in your 7th house, and that can create a scenario or an energy where you just kind of naturally feel like people have these expectations of you giving to them that they often don't reciprocate, and that can become kind of a pattern, right? And so you may have been kind of conditioned to that pattern, and that might be worth kind of keeping in mind or thinking about a bit. So through that, like trying to sort out work, health, service, things like this, the 6th house stuff, it may be really worthwhile to try to make sure that you are communicating as much as possible and trying to create as much clarity around what others genuinely are expecting from you, enough to actually be able to tell you. If other people have expectations of you and they're not willing to say it, then I don't think that that's something that you should probably be doing, So just kind of getting that out in the open, I think, would be really helpful too. Being also really honest with people if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you feel like you are overcommitted, and pulling back a bit, I think would be worthwhile. But again, try to communicate about that as openly as you can too. So yeah, ultimately this is what is trying to get sorted out as much as possible, which is reconnecting to like healthy connections with other people and with your own daily life. So a sustainable, workable routine and daily practice, basically, that feeds you, that fuels you, rather than draining you, right? So it may initially feel like you are getting drained from that. The point of that is not for that to just be the case, but to bring your attention to which little aspects of your routine or which expectations of others that are genuinely there, or which expectations of others that you might even be projecting a little bit and trying to meet, where that energy leak might be taking place. It might be then impacting your health. And then also reworking how it is that you serve, how it is that you deal with your own healing, how it is that you organize your life. So this isn't about rejecting other people or even rejecting serving other people. That may be something that is really important to you and that you connect with a lot, and that like feels like it is fueling your sense of purpose in this life. But ultimately, it's about, again, making that sustainable, making that efficient and effective so that you're not just kind of giving in all directions and then having little left for yourself to be able to do your own healing and to basically organize your own life in a way that is satisfying and functional for you. There may even be dynamics coming up for you where you are taking a sense of responsibility, or you're helping someone that's close to you with their healing, or vice versa. There may be a dynamic of you healing with someone else throughout this period of time too, and that would be really wonderful. Additionally, just to kind of reiterate, I think that there's something great here around your role with other people and what you want for that to look like, and how you want to be of service to others, because you may define your identity as strongly oriented toward being of service to others, or wanting to help other people, or wanting for other people to feel better. But just because you identify that way doesn't mean that the onus should be on you to do that in every given way. We are human beings. We can't do everything. We can't be everything for everyone. And I think that that's going to be some of the lesson that's baked into this retrograde for you as well. You may also feel pulled and pushed between your close relationships and your working life. And you may feel like you don't have the energy for both right now. So again, the solution to that would just be trying to communicate as much as you can throughout this period of time. It will be most likely a temporary kind of an issue along those lines where you're feeling pulled in two directions. But just being clear about, again, that you're a human being. You only have so much energy. And I wouldn't be surprised if by doing so, especially on the relationship side of that, if that is part of what then brings you into the sense of healing with another, or someone being able to help you with your healing as well, someone that's close to you. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Libra. So I hope this made sense, and I hope it helped. And I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. Okay, so for Scorpio, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction retrograde from your 6th house into your 5th house. And so this is bringing up matters of your routine, your working life, your health, your basically your daily tasks and things like that that you do and that you're active with. The 5th house is also a pretty active house, but it's more around your creativity, your hobbies, your interests, and things like this, as well as your children. And so those energies are going to be kind of blended together in the coming months around probably how it is that you feed your joys and your interests into your daily life. So do you feel like you are genuinely connected, like to your daily routine? Or even do you even feel as connected to the things that you have done for the sake of joy or a sense of creativity or these interests that you have? Do you really feel like they fit into your life anymore? And maybe part of the reason for that is just that you're not as into it anymore as you used to be. There could be some level of expectations that you had around certain projects or interests, or even some expectations that you had for your children, where you are realizing that your ideas around that or your expectations around that might need to pivot. This could even be an aspect of parenting. So for instance, if you have had children Especially if you've had children somewhat recently and maybe are going back into the workforce, you may be needing to readjust that in order to make it work. And that could be anything really along those lines around trying to make parenting work with your working life and the other stuff that you're needing to take care of. But generally speaking, I think this is, again, it's really about what is it that you enjoy? What is it that you feel really inspired to do? And is that a part of your daily routine? Are you able to bring that into your daily life more? Probably so that you can keep your spirits a little bit higher day to day and feel like you have a sense of more independent control over your day and how you're feeling about it as you're looking back on your day in the evening. And you may wind up then, if you've kind of gotten out of that, where you feel like you're just working a lot and you may be reorganizing your life and putting a huge amount of effort and energy into being super responsible, and you may feel like things have been a little bit less fun recently, even though you're trying to create something for yourself where you are able to be more independent or more individually driven. This is then likely to bring you back to that place of, but am I enjoying it? Because that's ultimately what it's about. So you may be tapping back into an interest or hobby or something like this that may have fallen out of your routine, and then tying that back in, reassimilating that joy into your daily life. And then, also just balancing this. So when it comes to your joy, when it comes to pleasures and things like that, being able to engage with that while not feeling like you're getting disorganized or distracted or something like that. But then on the other hand, not stifling that, not hindering your inspiration. Now, another area that I could definitely see this speaking to is, to me, the fifth house, it can really speak to projects and creative impulses that we may want to wind up weaving into our professional lives or something along those lines. So this could speak to, you have a pleasure that you would like to pursue as a career or as your working life. And you may be working that out over this period of time where you're trying to figure out, okay, how can I bring this more into my life? How can I give it a little bit more of my time to see if I can get this to take off a little bit more, or to get it to begin or to start soon. So I wouldn't be surprised if you are either developing the skills that are underlying that, or you're trying to figure out how to organize that better, or you're trying to figure out how to make time for that so that you're able to engage with that and then run with it. Because with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's coming into your sixth house, that sixth house with Aries there, it's going to make you want to have more independent or individual control over your day. And so I would not be surprised if that's a lot of the motivation that you're feeling around taking a skill or taking a talent that you have and then doing it independently, whether that be creative or whether it's just a talent or skill or something like that you have, where maybe you've been doing it professionally within a firm or something, and now you're wanting to maybe do consulting. And this may even be something that you were thinking about recently that winds up coming up again too. So past projects may wind up reemerging, and that may be just to get your mind back in that direction so that you're able to decide to do maybe something a little bit similar or along the same lines. But this could also speak to needing to balance out romantic partnerships and your routine. So hopefully you aren't finding that someone's demanding a little bit too much of your time for the sake of, like, where they're kind of getting in the way of your working life. But that may also be a theme, in which case the best thing to do with these two in retrograde is to just try and make sure that everything is out in the open. So, communicating about that. But you may even find that a past partner, because these are retrograde, that someone winds up reemerging in order to point out a matter of how partners wind up impacting your daily life and whether or not that is genuinely healthy or good for you. So if someone winds up reemerging and winds up being a bit of a chaotic or a hectic force in your life, that's just coming up in order to point out to you maybe there needs to be some stronger boundaries there, and not just in that relationship, but in relationships generally speaking, especially romantic relationships with the fifth house. I mean, this could even have to do with your children, of needing some stronger boundaries, either from your working life around your parenthood or vice versa. So yeah, I wouldn't fret too much if there's some confusion along these lines where those lines wind up getting a bit blurred. It's more so to push you to clarify these matters so that your daily life can be more enjoyable, more fulfilling, and more under your own control with Aries there in the future. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio. So I hope this made sense and was helpful, and I hope this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Sagittarius, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is retrograding back from your fifth house into your fourth house. So your fifth house having to do with creativity, joy, pleasures, hobbies, interests, activities like these. And then, children, if I didn't say that. And then your fourth house has to do also with your family, your home, your roots, your core, and what is of deep significance to you. So, of course, we may see some significant matters around family life arising with this conjunction moving back from the fifth into the fourth. So there could even be some blurred lines between your offspring and your family of origin, or that of a partner, something like this, where you feel like those families, right, are weaving together a bit more. And that may or may not be in a way that is welcome. So for instance, if you are needing some help with your children, parents may come in very strong and helpful. But on the other hand, it may be that there is an unwelcome sense of interference with that, or there may be a sense of patterns from your childhood or from your parents that you are a bit uneasy about seeing come through with your children, such that you are going back and reevaluating the roots of that, probably to try and uproot it and gain a little bit more personal control over your relationship with your children, because that's something that is going to be, if you do have children and this is playing out in this way, something that you're going to want to have a lot of individual say in how that goes with Aries in that house. So yeah, those boundaries when it comes to your family may feel like they are a bit blurred, or that it may feel like they dissolve completely. And this may be frustrating, because it's likely that over the past couple of years that you've had these two coming through this fourth, that's something that you feel like you've established pretty well. If you feel like those are loosening up a bit again, try not to fret. It's a period of time. It's just to bring this up to clarify a bit more around that. You may also find that there's something here about ancestral patterns or subconscious patterns or your conditioning from youth that is coming up for greater release. Again, if this is something that's coming up, probably it's a matter that you've been looking at a bit over the past couple of years too. And this would ultimately be coming up in order to get you in a position to where you feel like you are able to express yourself more freely and with less inhibition, that you probably can note yourself as to how that came from your family or your upbringing or something like this. So by going in for another round of releasing those patterns, you should be able to emerge from that then much more able to independently express yourself very authentically. Maybe you even have interests or something like this that were belittled or weren't considered very serious in your family of origin. If that's the case, if there's something that you're thinking of along those lines, this is also probably trying to put you more in touch with that. Because I would not be surprised if there's something here about like family expectations that are either very real, actually probably are when they come from family, because that's where we pick up on what we expect other people expect from us, basically. Or this may be an expectation that you are placing upon yourself because you think that that's what your family is wanting. Questions like that along those lines are also very possibly baked into all of this. So generally speaking, then coming back to the sense of what is home, what is family, what are your emotional foundations, what is your sense of your own origin story? One thing with Saturn and Neptune is that it takes apart an old story that's no longer serving us. That's what it does in the world, right? When I'm talking about 89 and 52 and stuff like that, these are major moments of the world story changing and the perceived parameters within which we are functioning. That is, it changes because our imagination of what the world is changes. And so this is another really wonderful opportunity where these planets are going to be closer than they were to each other, even last time that they were in Pisces, to have those there together it's giving you permission to redefine that story for yourself. So where is it that you come from? Is your origin story a happy one? If it's not, I would say that this is actually a really beautiful opportunity to change that for yourself, to take hold of that. Again, that Saturn-Neptune is moving out of this passive place where it's been in Pisces in your fourth, where maybe you do feel, generally speaking, like you do have some kind of blurred boundaries in your family, or you feel like you are of service to your family in some way. So because of the fact that it's just been in Pisces, that may not have been completely clear to you. Now that they've moved into Aries and then back into Pisces, it might become a little bit more clear of, I don't need to allow for the definition of my sense of my origin and my roots and where I come from and my foundation to be defined by other people at all. You can redefine all sorts of difficult experiences or weird experiences or anything, even positive experiences. You could redefine them if you want to. As, yeah, I realized that this was X, Y, and Z kind of an experience, but I can also see how exactly that kind of a thing got me to this point of having a greater sense of control over my own life, with Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries, into your fifth, where it's a little bit more about your own growth, your own control, your own personal expression. So coming into that through this self-defining, hopefully Aries is kind of sticking with those planets a bit and giving you that permission of the meaning of all of this is whatever helps, really, There aren't actually any real parameters around, I need to think that I don't have luck just because things haven't gone exactly the way that I've wanted for them to, or whatever the case may be. But we can look back on difficult experiences as well and define them as, it may not have been what I wanted, but I can see how it got me here, at least, So additionally then, yeah, when it comes to like rootedness, recommitting to your rootedness, I would really feel like that's more individual. That's more like on your own 2 feet, defining this for yourself, especially for Sagittarius rising. You, like I said, you have Pisces in your fourth, right? So that to speak to some interesting, flowy kinds of boundaries that are in your life. But it also means that you, Sagittarius, your ascendant ruler, presumably, is also then your fourth house ruler. So that can also, because both of them would be ruled by Jupiter, that can then even further tie in the significance of your origin and where you come from with your sense of self, right? Your sense of identity. So it's very important that this is something that works for you. So again, I'm hoping that a bit of that, like even the inner planets, as I was saying in the general reading, we've had so many retrogrades over this area. I'm hoping that some of that Aries energy may have like kind of bled into this fourth house area and giving you a bit more of a sense of your own ability to define your rootedness. But yeah, this is also then going to speak to living situations. So beyond family, this is also just your house, your home, where you're living. And so this could also be around, what is your ideal living situation? This is such a core thing for us where it's so dependent on what's available and like material circumstances and things like that. Like there's a lot of people that aren't living in their ideal living situations and yet don't feel like they could be due to financial constraints or family constraints or things like this. So this may also be something that is being called into question of, are those constraints truly real? And is there maybe an alternative way of getting around that and twisting that story for yourself? There most likely would be during this period of time, much more so in terms of wiggle room and being able to call shots in an interesting kind of a way than would usually be the case. And your ideals around this may even just be changing. Maybe you've been someone who loves to live with other people, loves to have other people around. Maybe you're just feeling more so now like you enjoy your independence more with Saturn and Neptune now moving into that expressive house of yours in the fifth in Aries, where it's like, man, I just want to be able to be me and not have to worry about stepping on toes or whatever. Another thing that I could see coming through with this that's quite beautiful is, to me, the fifth house, we can imagine it in a couple of ways. So it's, the fourth house is your core, but it's also your origin, so your origin family, right? And then the fifth house is how that is expressed outwardly. So these kinds of soulful activities that are deeply satisfying to who we are in our core, those come through in the fifth house. They come up and out into the fifth from the fourth. That's also why children are represented in the fifth, because it's like it's up out of the roots of you and your history, your ancestry, that come forth offspring, right? So this could also be really, if you've had a spark around a creative pursuit or a soulful pursuit of yours that you feel is very purposeful, this could be pulling you back to that core, that soul of the why of it, or the seed of it, basically, to look at that once again and then come back out into the fifth house and have that creative output that much more soulful in the coming years. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Sagittarius. It's a pretty cool one. I like this one quite a bit. So I hope that it treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Capricorn, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction retrograding from your fourth house into your third house. And so what we're basically dealing with here is the fourth house has to do with home, family, your sense of roots, your core, like your soul, basically, your sense of your foundation. And then the third house has to do with communications, exchange with others, verbal expression, communication like that. Siblings and extended family can also be seen in the third house. Sometimes we can even see grandparents showing up here, or aunts, uncles, people like that. We can also see connections with your environment, so the people, places, things around you, as well as technology and some other little things, commerce, things like that, wind up falling under the third house. Community as well as a strong one. So another interesting kind of connection between these two beyond, okay, your parents, right? Or close family, and then what's before that or just beside that, adjacent to that being your siblings, your grandparents, your extended family. But we can also then see here home and all the stuff that's around it, the environment around it, right? So when we get a lot of retrogrades along these lines, which we've had for a little while, but it's getting a bit louder now that we have these two heavy hitters going retrograde across here, that can potentially blur boundaries or bring up questions around boundaries when it comes to your community and your home/family. So hopefully there's not blurred lines with neighbors or community groups or siblings or grandparents or aunts or uncles or whatever, where you feel like somehow they are having a little bit too much input on you and your home and your family. But that's one thing I definitely want to mention quickly, is something that could come up. And it would mostly be probably to like clarify that you don't like that's not something that you're cool with. And so hopefully you can address that in a verbally graceful way to make sure that you're making your boundaries there kind of clear. But with that aside, this is also potentially bringing up communication or tech issues as well. Having both of these retrograde in this third house, please be careful with your phones and your computers, like your laptops, your portable technology and stuff, to not drop things. I wouldn't be surprised to see mysterious, stupid little issues around disconnection, or there may even be a weird thing with like a wireless contract or an internet contract or something like that that is confusing. There may be like charges or something like that. Another thing that I'm going to throw some miscellaneous little warnings to you, and hopefully I'll get most of them out of the way to start with. The third house also has to do with you driving, especially locally, but kind of travel in general. I would just be kind of careful about speed and things like that. Also distraction. So, just be a little bit careful about that. It's not the worst kind of a transit. It's not just like malicious or anything, but it can be a bit blurry, right? So just something to keep in mind also while driving. But aside from all of that, these two coming together in the third house, it could have you connecting with your community in a different way. Now, this is going to be probably playing out along similar, but maybe not exactly the same lines as you've been dealing with your community in recent years, because you have had Saturn and Neptune coming through this place already for a couple of years. And you may find that your relationship with your community has shifted, especially since about 2023. And there may be a sense of, like, am I aligned with this? Is this really supportive of me? You may even feel like there's something confusing about your community around you. And I don't know if it would be this, but I do find that most people feel pretty confused about what is going on with other people, generally speaking. So that may be a major aspect of this, is just not understanding how it is that people around you are believing or saying what it is that they are. I think that's pretty normal. Like I said, most of the people that I talk to feel this on some level or another. I certainly feel that way. But for you, in some way, it may feel like it hits home, right? So maybe some of what people are thinking or believing or saying actually has something to do with you very personally. Like maybe this is an identity thing as well, or it directly impacts your family or your roots or something like that. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be like right on the nose. Not to get too personal, but for instance, the anti-immigration stuff in the US is just kind of tripping me out a lot, because I am of Irish descent, and we definitely did not come here under the best of circumstances, and yet somehow it was considered a problem at the time, and somehow it's there's like Irish Americans who are taking issue with immigration now, and it's just such a trip to me. So it's like, even though it's not quote unquote a matter of my identity, it definitely is, you know. So there may be something along those lines that you're just kind of tripped out about as well, that seems really unclear. Now, you may get some clarity around that with this retrograde, but it's probably just going to wind up bringing you back to a place of, I know where I stand, I know what I believe, I know what is meaningful and valuable to me, and I'm just going to have to run with it on my values and probably worry a little bit less about what other people are thinking, since this is ultimately going to land you back with Saturn and Neptune in your fourth in Aries, right? So there may also be, with the third house, like having these two having come into your fourth, where it's really speaking to your soul and your core, and then coming back into the third, you may really find that, perhaps especially with the upheaval in the world, but it may have nothing to do with that, that just writing, communicating to yourself, journaling, studying, trying to learn more, possibly again about yourself with the fourth house here as well. Maybe even learning about your roots too. I mean, maybe that's part of the thing of me, you know, bringing up Irish history or something like that. It may be speaking also to that of, for instance, if you are a U.S. citizen, learning more about U.S. history or whatever, and maybe even then writing about that. And that could be blogging too. It doesn't just have to be writing for yourself, but it would be purposeful and soulful writing, whatever it is. You may also find that there is an interesting comfort that you're having more so with communicating your needs too, where you've become very clear on what your needs are as distinct from what other people's expectations are from you, and that you are therefore feeling more comfortable speaking that out. Now, I do hate to say, just standard kind of definitions, delineations, I should say, retrograde Saturn, retrograde Neptune in the third, you might not be communicating as clearly as you usually are. So that's something that you might want to keep in mind, is that you may be misconstrued or you may be misunderstood, and it might not be due to someone else being obtuse, and it might not even necessarily be your fault, but there's a blurring of those communication lines. That's also why I was speaking to that in a literal way of your internet may fall, you know, or there may be confusion around like a wireless contract or something. It's like those communication lines are super murky, especially when those two are retrograde. So something to keep in mind. You might not be understanding other people, and they might not be understanding you much more than usual. You may also find that there's some information or just something on a lower level that is a given. So the thing with the third too is, like, this is what's familiar, whereas the ninth house tends to speak to what's more along the lines of expansion or pushing us out of our sense of familiarity, right? Pushing us toward growth. So there might be a belief or information or knowledge that we just kind of take for granted, that we have believed in just because we haven't considered something else really. That may also be something that winds up coming up during these months, where it's coming up for reassessment, basically. You may find that this belief of yours is undermined in the way that I've been speaking of how Neptune can come in and wash away some of the decaying foundation of Saturn there. So there may be an assumption that you've run with for a while. This is going to, don't feel shame about this. This is actually one of the best ways that this can wind up playing out. I think kind of for you more so than even for a lot of signs, there's something really fundamental about the stories that we believe with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and the fact that they are supposed to change when those two come into conjunction. Neptune is supposed to wear that away. And so that may feel like it's more in your grasp than it is for other people. And so one thing I would say too is you may feel a bit impatient with other people not recognizing as easily the older beliefs that we've had collectively that are being proven to not have a strong basis. You may be surprised that other people are not picking up on that as quickly as you are. And that may be part of the gift of having this part of that conjunction in your third house, where it's more so, it's very accessible to your mind to see what the BS is, right? So I would just try your best to, for a lot of people, that realization might only come in February or sometime after that. So if you can try and be patient around that, that might be good. And that might be part of that discernment, around what you're saying, is sometimes people can get defensive if we intentionally or not belittle them for not understanding the reality of a situation. It can put them on the defensive such that they wind up holding on to that falsehood for longer, because now they've had an ego reaction to it and now they're identifying with it more strongly, so just something that I'm going to throw out there. And ultimately, this is speaking to coming back to your sense of your voice, your beliefs, your values, and how it is that you express or advocate for those things in your life or in the broader world. So you may find yourself becoming active in your community in order to live your message, to live your core, what you feel in your soul, and to share that and to spread that. But there may also then be something very significant here about your voice and feeling more confident in that, because one thing to keep in mind for you always is you might waver in that occasionally because of the fact that you naturally have Pisces in your third house. So you might be a little bit more shy to insist upon what it is that you're saying and what it is that you know. And there may be then, and then sometimes I also identify with that, so no judgment, but sometimes then we can ourselves get a little bit ego defensive about our beliefs and be assertive such that other people perceive it as aggressive, right? So there may be something here about a greater certainty in your beliefs such that you are able to express it in a way that is forthcoming and honest and doesn't pull punches, but also doesn't throw them willy-nilly, So yeah, I think this will be coming up along those lines. There may even be something here about mending of your connections with family, perhaps especially extended family. But yeah, I think those are most of the big things that I wanted to mention for you. So I hope that all made sense. And I hope this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. So for Aquarius, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction going retrograde from your third house into your second house. And this is an interesting, a little bit more disconnected set of houses, I feel. So the second house has to do with your sense of security, stability, your resources, generally speaking, be they emotional or financial, material resources. Sometimes we can even see skills and things like this, talents in the second house, because those are resources that we wind up drawing upon. And those material resources can also be physical in the sense of our body, our health. Now, outward from that, then we have the third house come up, and this is more where we connect with that which is definitely outside of us. So the third house has to do with the people, places, things around us. It has to do with our environment in that way, our community, with communication, with exchange. It also has to do with our mental resources, our thought processes, and what's familiar to us. So the assumptions we make also show up in the third house. We can even see siblings, peers, extended family, even grandparents show up in the third house as well. So Saturn and Neptune have gone from your second house out into your third, and now they're going back into the second for a moment to have you kind of reconsider or revise this area. So this is speaking to, again, your resources, which speaks to income and your finances and things like this, but it also speaks to your values more generally. So there's questions here with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that I'm sure have come up for you in recent years around what it is that you truly value, and a desire to then bring that more so into your everyday life. So wanting to have your emotional, spiritual values align with your income, your resources, where it is that you're deriving value. And so you may feel like this has been heavy on your mind in recent years and then let up a bit. And for some reason now it's coming back up again for review. And you may wind up reviewing like income sources, old or established income sources, or patterns of spending. Perhaps some of that has to do with your community involvement, and maybe you are reviewing them because you want to reconsider some of those things. So you may be finding, for instance, like, okay, I know this is cliche at this point, but certainly subscriptions would show up in the third house of basically any sort, actually, would wind up showing up here. So that may be something that you're reviewing. Basically, are your resources truly supporting your sense of quality of life and connectedness? And so naturally, you may be axing some of those things that you are deciding the answer to that is no, or not so much. Or maybe you're making room for, perhaps if you're wanting to move, if you're wanting to be in a different community or something like this, you may be reassessing your savings for that and doubling down basically on that in order to achieve that goal of changing what it is that's around you in order to feel more in line or more aligned with your environment. So there may also be something here around, I would actually take this further than what I have here, of your attachments and your alignments. So how do I want to put this? You may also be feeling in these coming months like you're coming back to your values rather than community values as defined perhaps outside of yourself, or where you feel like there's a lot of input of other people into the values of a given thing. Maybe for one example, this could be a community group or something where you feel like there's a sway on the values behind what it is that you're contributing to. And you may be asking yourself if you really feel like that's a good fit for you anymore. You could even find yourself tuning out of media in some way or another because you feel like you're wanting to come back more into a sense of equilibrium in and of yourself. This could speak to emotional stability and security as well. If you feel like the media that you have been consuming, be it news media or even other types of media, being a sociologist, this has basically ruined all media for me, of just understanding like what an impact it has on us and our behavior and our sense of well-being and so forth, all of the media that we consume. So even the messages that we pick up on from friggin' websites or sitcoms or whatever can have a pretty strong impact on us. So that may even be something that you're reassessing, is like, what kind of media are you consuming, and is it really good for you? Is it really aligned with your values, and is it really making you feel stable and secure on your own 2 feet? So one specific example of this could be like if you're watching the news a lot and it's freaking out about the financial situation or wars or this and that, and it's this back and forth, and you feel like there's no stable ground to that, then you may find, okay, I'm tuning out from that, and I'm tuning back into the fact that I'm good, I'm okay, and there's not much indication that I'm not going to be okay. And so just getting back to that, basically. I think probably all of us should do that a little bit more in the coming months, but for you, it's definitely standing out in that way. But there could also then be like releasing attachments too. So that's what I was saying of like something around values outside of yourself or attachments, expectations or something like that from other people that you're feeling more freedom to release yourself from and to maybe step back from too. And yeah, I touched on this quite a bit. This is what you've been doing, I would assume, in the past couple of years, is spiritually and creatively aligning your resources. But this is coming back to that for one more go, one more realignment, one more clarification or interweaving of your values with your resources. There may be certain things, which I would not be surprised given how crazy the past months have been, maybe certain things that you've picked up on or that you've learned in these months that you are now assimilating back into what it is that you were deciding in recent years about how to better align yourself and your values with your resources too. So it's probably something of a major confirmation that you're coming into about the work that you've been doing over the past couple of years along those lines. And yeah, ultimately, this is to bring you back into a sense of very grounded self-worth. So when I was talking about maybe tuning out of the media or maybe tuning out of the expectations of others or the values input of others, stepping back from that a bit in order to ground that again more so in your second, in yourself rather, because your second it's mostly you that should be there, right? This shouldn't really be interfered with much by outside concerns. It's like, this is you, and this is how you ground yourself. This is how you define yourself. So coming back to this place, I would say in the coming months, this is coming from a super social place of the third back into the second. It's about coming back to yourself, and more than anything, coming back to your own set of values and stability and security. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else about this. One more quick warning, or like a little caution or a little heads up or something. There could be some weird documentation or something about your resources. I would just be for sure reading fine print when it comes to contracts and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's most of what I can think of. So I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Pisces, last but not least, we have Saturn and Neptune conjoined in your second house, retrograding back into your first house. So this is deeply personal for you. And it is speaking to your sense of self-worth, your values, your perspectives on things, how it is that you connect with matters or whatever, everything, how it is that you connect with anything pretty much. But also it's about with the second house. This has to do with your resources, your sense of stability, security. This can speak to resources such as your talents, skills, your emotional resources. This can speak to the resource of your health and well-being, your strength. And so all of the retrogrades really that we've been having recently have been, I think, trying to help to ground you a bit. And that may just be something that's kind of necessary for Pisces rising as we're going into the coming years, is just a bit more of like, hey, let's get a little bit more grounded. I can say this because I have too much Pisces in my chart. But that may be something that's just kind of trying to shore you up into the Aries energy that you do have at your disposal from your second, which is when it comes down to it, you're definitely able to defend your values, defend your standing, defend your sense of security and stability in yourself and your sense of self-value, right? So there may be something coming up here around attachments that you have. That's one thing we can see in the second house as well. So attachments that you may have around your identity, so ego defenses or things like this, may be being made a little bit more apparent or being brought to your awareness so that you can release them in these coming months here. And that basically just to get you in a state of stronger standing, a stronger sense of your own identity and security. And that's what I was kind of getting at is a Pisces can be very, very nice, but can also wind up then holding too much space for other people. And even, I'm going to use a term, again, I can say this, I've got too much Pisces. We can even be a little bit wishy-washy with people of like, hey, yeah, that's cool. You decide, that kind of thing. The Aries is not so much like that. And so you do have that in your second. You do have that available to you. And I think a lot of that is around that, like refining your sense of identity and putting it a little bit more firmly in yourself and up to yourself, by releasing the Piscean tendency to be like, yeah, it's cool, yeah, it's cool, yeah, it's cool, beyond the point where it's no longer cool anymore, and then kind of door slamming a situation of like, well, I gave you all the chances in the world. You could have cleared up, but you didn't, so you're gone. This can make it a little bit clearer to be able to then state those boundaries and make sure that they're not crossed ahead of time, So yeah, that's also then definitely speaking to a lot of this as well. The boundaries, the personal illusions. So especially one thing that this has been releasing for some years, or has been trying to work on this conjunction here in recent years, and that's going to come up again with this retrograde, is questions around how you may have some self-limiting beliefs that need to be released. So any sort of conditioning or stories that you've told yourself about what's possible for you. The conjunction of those two or the co-presence at least, having both of them in your first house for the past couple of years, has been around taking a greater authority over your own self, your own story, your sense of where it is that you fit into the world, your role in the world, your identity. So taking greater authority over that, and then turning that, redirecting that in directions that feel in greater alignment, or simply that give you more confidence, that give you the ability to say, yes, this is me, these are my boundaries, they're solid, and I'm good with them, and I don't really ever need to question whether or not I'm being reasonable by having those boundaries there, right? So that is part of the personal illusion of Pisces rising, is that everyone else is just as important for you as you. We all struggle with that when we have a lot of Pisces stuff, but that's not really true. And part of what we're here to learn is we do need to hold ourselves in high regard for ourselves and prioritize ourselves, because if we don't, no one else really will, so we can still be compassionate and caring and take care of other people. But I think a lot of this is really going to be speaking to shoring up the story that you tell yourself about your own sense of deservingness, and confirming that and clarifying that for you. And yeah, this is ultimately then about the integration of that selfhood, integration of your sense of your own standing, your own self-sufficiency, your own values, your own judgments, and bringing those back to you and your identity, and affirming to you, these are yours, and that is perfectly fine. You don't really need to sweep these aside for the sake of other people, because you wouldn't expect for other people to do that for you. So yeah, this is one more big push to rebuild yourself from the inside out. So this is the least amount fake it till you make it. This is like the least that could possibly be. This is the most opposite to that. This is about being as deeply real with yourself as you possibly can. And then that will come out on the outside in a genuine way when you are just super certain about where it is that you stand with yourself, with regard to yourself, your values, your beliefs, your self-sufficiency, your self-worth, and so on. I'm trying to think of what else. So another thing I would throw on top of this is, if you are trying to be more financially independent, this is also going to be bringing a greater sense of clarity around that to you. So it's tapping you a little bit more into your identity yourself, right? And that is, for some reason, helpful to clarifying how to establish that financial independence. So it's kind of like putting the ball back in your court of, hey, take one final look at this. Is this what you're wanting? Is this what you're after? Clarifying where you're standing with that. Possibly a bit of a test around your boundaries that may speak to your financial standing or something like this. And then eventually kicking it back into your second house where, as I've mentioned in the Saturn and Aries forecast, or horoscope for you, the Neptune and Aries horoscope for you, and then the conjunction horoscope for you. I've definitely been repeating quite a bit. There's probably something here about you wanting to make money independently or something like that with Aries in this place, and then the Saturn-Neptune conjunction here too. And that's definitely a thing. Like, this gives you so much opportunity to run with that and do that. But during this winter, it's really about making sure that you're super clear with yourself about what your expectations are there, and being very clear and honest with yourself about the resources that you have to make that a reality and how those might develop in the coming years too. And yeah, other than that, just maybe some like reinforcement of some pride in yourself about self-sufficiency. Maybe that's been something of a journey for you, or maybe it's a journey that you're just now kicking off. But I think there's some sense of pride that you should be able to derive from that as well. And yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Pisces. So I hope this made sense, and I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here.